Hey everyone, welcome back to day number 13 of CSS3 in 30 days. Today we're going to be building a CSS Sticky Footer. Now what is a sticky footer? Well, a sticky footer is a footer on your web page that sticks to the bottom of your viewport, regardless of the content size within the page. So for example, if you have a page layout and you only have one sentence, and then you have your footer, let's call it a colored footer, it's not going to stay at the bottom of the viewport of your browser. That's because it collapses up into the end of the content. So your footer is actually a quarter of the way down the page and you got all this white space below it. It looks pretty bad. Now, a sticky footer makes that footer actually go to the bottom of the browser viewport, even if the content is way up here. So let me show you what that looks like. Over here, I have in the number 13 sticky footer project files. Go ahead and download that. There's a number of different files in this one. It's a little bit different than what we have normally been doing. I'll show you what that looks like here. So we have index.html, final.html, student.html, and we also have final and sandbox.css. Now, why do I have that? The index.html page is the info page. It's just instructions on what you're going to be building and why you're going to be building it, and then a couple of buttons that allow you to go to the student version and the final version. So the info page is just your instructions and then access to these buttons. So if I go to the student version, this is the sandbox, the student version with the sticky footer down here that you need to make sticky. Now, this is an example of a non-sticky footer. The content of this page here, as you can see, it is pretty short. And the bottom of the viewport is way down here. And this footer is there. So it doesn't actually look like a footer. It's just another element below this content. Now we want to make this footer stick to the bottom of the viewport, like the final version right here. Now if I were to resize this browser window, that footer follows along, as you can see there. Follows where I drag, and then it stops at this here, and then there's a scroll. So that is a sticky footer. And then the student version, you could see, is non-sticky. So it's actually quite easy to make this. It involves very minimal markup and just some CSS trickery. So let's go ahead, jump into our code editor here, and let's get started. So you don't really need to concern yourself with index.html. It doesn't really matter. So it is final.html. If you want to see the final version, you can see here, if I scroll down, we have a few things that you need to note. There's a div here that wraps everything in with the class called page content. Now below that page content, it's not within it, is footer, and that contains a div as well. All of these elements are important. Now, if I go to your student.html, it's the same markup. We got page content, and then outside of that, we have a footer with a div inside of it. Now, if we go to our sandbox.css, let's get started with our styling of this sticky footer. The first thing that you need to always do is start off with the HTML and body. Select the two of those. We're going to give it a height of 100%. And a margin of 0. So we want to clean that up, make sure that the HTML and body have a height of 100% of the viewport and a margin of 0 so it doesn't mess with our calculations. Now, we're going to select that page content class that we saw right here. And in there, we're going to say minimum height, or min height rather, of 100%. That forces it to have a minimum height of 100% rather than the height of whatever is contained. So minimum height 100% of the viewport, or its parent, which is HTML and body. Now we're going to come back to page content and give it some negative margin. But first I want to move forward so that it makes sense why we're giving it negative margin. So let's go down to page content after. And we're going to say content, it's going to be an empty string because, you know, when you have an after virtual element, you need to give it content so that it actually appears. And display block. Now what we're going to do is below that, we're going to select the footer and page content after. Now what we're doing here is we're selecting the footer itself and the after element, the after virtual element of the page content. And all we're doing is giving it a height of, let's say, 120 pixels. Now you need a fixed height for the footer. It could be any height that you want. If it's only 30 pixels or if it's 500 pixels, it's up to you, but you need to know the height. That's the catch with the sticky footer. The reason why is, if I were to go and view this in the browser, you can see now that the footer is actually below the viewport. So if I scroll down, there's a 120 pixel footer below. So all I need to do here is, in the page content element, which is everything within here, is bring that footer up the height of its container. So the height of the footer is 120 pixels. So if we go back to page content, and I'm just going to have a comment here that says margin bottom, negative 120 pixels. Save that, head over to your browser, check out the student version, and there's the sticky footer at the bottom. I can't scroll up and down, it's just there. And if I were to bring the viewport smaller, it's a perfect sticky footer. If I brought it all the way up so it bumps up at the bottom of this content, it's going to stop with the margin that is already declared there. And I can scroll down. So if this content grows, this sticky footer stays where it is until it bumps up against it and it will push it further down. But it is always stuck to the bottom of the viewport. That is it for a sticky footer. It's very simple, quick overview. In the markup, we have page content, that div, and then outside of that div, we have a footer, and then a div within that footer for any content you have. So essentially the markup looks like this. You have a div with the class, let's call it page content, and then you have a footer. All you're doing in the CSS is giving the HTML and the body a height of 100%. The page content itself needs to be minimum height of 100%. And the page content after virtual element needs to be display block. The footer and the page content after pseudo element or virtual element is 120 pixels in this case. It could be any height you want. And then the page content needs a negative bottom margin of the same height as the footer. And then you can see here that that is all the markup you need, and it should work just fine over here in your browser. That's it for the sticky footer. Go ahead and use that in your own websites. I use it for my websites when I have a footer, a client website, or a project website. If I have a footer that I need stuck to the bottom, I will go ahead and create a sticky footer. It takes no time out of your day, and it's very quick to implement. Hopefully this was valuable to you. See you tomorrow in day 14.